My wife said my friends were real men and told me to leave. I smiled as you wish. The next morning, all four were rushed to the ER, then the doctor revealed why. The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions. At 2:37 in the morning, I watched a nurse wheel my wife past me on a gurney, and after 11 years of marriage, all I felt was a cold, surgical calm. Victoria looked up at me. Mascara ran down her cheeks, her honey brown hair was matted against the pillow, and an IV entered her arm beneath a hospital gown. Even then, sick and flat on her back, she found enough energy to reveal exactly who she had become. "Julian," she rasped, her voice cracked and dry. "Don't you dare look at me like that." I said nothing. I simply looked at her. Nobody tells you that when your world collapses, it rarely falls the way buildings do in movies. There is no dramatic explosion, no slow-motion cloud of dust and fire. Most of the time, the ground shifts one quiet degree at a time, over months or years, until one morning you realize it has been moving beneath you for so long that the place where you are standing looks nothing like the place where you began. My name is Julian Mercer. I am 43 and a structural engineer. For 20 years, I designed bridges that carried thousands of vehicles, yet I failed to see the bridge inside my own home collapsing until it was already in the river. But before I can explain what happened in that emergency room, and before I can tell you what the doctor said when he stood among four adjacent hospital bays and looked at my wife and the three men who had betrayed me, I need to go back to the beginning. The beginning did not look like betrayal. It looked like a dinner party. 6 months earlier, Victoria and I hosted dinner at our home in Dublin, Ohio, a prosperous Columbus suburb of immaculate lawns and expensive cars. We had lived for 8 years in a 4-bedroom colonial on Muirfield Drive, the kind of house that made us look like a couple who had everything figured out. We did not, but we looked convincing. The guests that evening were people I had known and trusted for years. Connor Briggs was my closest friend from graduate school at Ohio State, a broad-shouldered civil engineer whose laugh filled every room. His wife, Dana, was a quiet, observant pediatric nurse with sharp brown eyes. Ryan Holloway, my former college roommate, was a pharmaceutical sales director in Westerville. Divorced and between relationships, he wore a $12,000 watch he claimed was a gift, and always stood slightly too close to other men's wives. Derek Callahan was my 28-year-old colleague, brilliant, ambitious, and newly promoted to project manager after years of my mentorship. I had reviewed his work, stayed late to help him, and personally recommended him. These men were not casual acquaintances. They were my inner circle. They were the men I believed I could call at 2 in the morning during the worst years of my life. They were the men who had stood beside me at my father's funeral. Victoria moved through the dinner party effortlessly, as if the room were built for her. Her years as an event coordinator showed in the flowers, the timing of each course, and her talent for making every guest feel important. She was 40 years old and looked 32, and she knew it. She had always known it. That night, I noticed the way she laughed at Ryan's jokes. It was not the polite laugh she gave most people. It was her real laugh, the one that started deep in her chest. I had not heard her laugh that way at anything I said in a very long time. I noticed Derek watching her refill his wine glass and saw her hand remain on Connor's shoulder 2 seconds too long as she reached for the breadbasket. I noticed everything, then filed it away where I would not have to examine it. I am a structural engineer. I notice load distribution. I notice stress points. I notice the small signs that reveal when a structure is under pressure before that pressure becomes catastrophic. Yet I did what many people in comfortable lives do when they receive information they do not want to process. I set it aside. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself Victoria loved me. I told myself that 11 years of marriage, a mortgage, 2 dogs, and an entire life constructed together were sufficient proof that everything was fine. I was wrong. The first undeniable crack appeared 3 weeks later. Victoria's phone lit up on the kitchen counter as I passed to get water. I had never searched her messages, but the screen was bright and close enough for me to see the sender. Ryan H. The preview beneath it said, "Last night was..." Then the screen went dark. Cold water ran into the sink while something dropped inside my chest, like a key falling from a hook in a room I had avoided for years. I turned off the water and remained there in the kitchen of the house where I had lived for 8 years. I did not confront her. Not then. When I encounter a structural problem I do not fully understand, I gather information before acting. I needed to know whether I had seen a misleading fragment or the edge of something much larger. Over the next 3 weeks, the evidence arrived in pieces. I found a receipt in the pocket of Victoria's coat while preparing to take it to the dry cleaner. It was for dinner for two at the Rosewood Grill in the Short North on a Thursday night when she had told me she was attending a book club with her friend Lena. One Saturday afternoon, she said she was going to a yoga class in Clintonville. I happened to drive past the studio while running an errand. Her car was not there. Then Ryan traveled to Chicago for business. 2 days later, a charge appeared on our joint credit card statement from the Lowe's Hotel on Michigan Avenue. The charge had been made with Victoria's card, which she had apparently forgotten was still connected to the account we used for household expenses. Chicago, Michigan Avenue, the Lowe's Hotel. I sat with that statement in front of me for 45 minutes. Then I opened my laptop, checked flight records and confirmations, and verified what I already suspected. Victoria had flown to Chicago on a Thursday and returned Friday. During that same week, she had told me she was driving to Cincinnati to visit her mother. I called her mother under the pretense of checking in. She had not seen Victoria in more than a month. I could have confronted her when she returned with her overnight bag and her prepared Cincinnati story. But Victoria could redirect any difficult conversation until the person asking questions seemed guilty. I was not going to give her that opportunity until I had facts she could not reshape. Instead, I called Arthur Keene. Arthur was a 61-year-old former Columbus police detective who ran a private investigation firm on East Broad Street. I had met him through a legal dispute involving my firm and knew he was discreet, methodical, and exceptionally thorough. Arthur, I said, I need your help, and I need you to be thorough. Always am, he replied. Tell me everything. 4 weeks later, Arthur met me on a Wednesday morning at a coffee shop on High Street. He placed a manila folder on the table between our coffee cups and looked at me the way experienced men look at other men when they are about to deliver news that cannot be taken back. Do you want to look at this here? He asked. Or take it home? Here. The folder contained photographs, receipts, dates, locations, and a chronological timeline. Arthur offered no opinions, only documented facts. Ryan had been involved with Victoria for about 6 months. Arthur documented Columbus hotels, the Chicago trip, and 2 visits to an apartment on Kenny Road that Ryan had leased in September, 1 month before our dinner party. That fact lodged in my chest like a stone. Ryan had rented a private apartment, then sat at my table in October, eating my food and laughing about college, while months into an affair with my wife. Then I turned to the section on Connor Briggs. Connor's affair had lasted about 2.5 months. It was harder to absorb because he was the last man I would have suspected. My closest friend, Dana's husband, the father of 2 children, and the man who had talked to me for 2 hours at midnight after my father died. Apparently, none of that had been worth more to him than whatever he had begun with Victoria. The third section concerned Derek. Arthur had documented 2 dinners, a weekend at a bed and breakfast in Granville, and several Short North restaurant charges across 6 weeks. I had mentored Derek through 3 projects, defended his readiness for more responsibility, and attached my professional judgment to his promotion while he met my wife in secret. I read every page twice. Arthur drank his coffee and said nothing. He understood that silence was sometimes the most respectful thing one person could offer another. When I finished, I closed the folder and looked through the window. It was February, and light snow was settling on parked cars, sidewalks, and the shoulders of people walking to work. 3 of them, I said. It was not a question. 3 confirmed, Arthur replied. Different time periods. Not all concurrent, but there was overlap. Does she know that I know? Based on her behavior over the last 4 weeks, no. I nodded. What do you want to do? He asked. Outside, a couple passed the window, leaning toward one another against the cold. I watched them without truly seeing them. I want to handle this correctly, I said. I don't want to blow everything up just to watch it burn. I want to understand it first. Arthur nodded once. Smart. And I want to be ready. I chose a Saturday morning in March to confront Victoria. For most of our marriage, Saturday breakfast had been our ritual. Eggs, toast, and coffee from a machine bought in Portland. It was a small agreement that whatever happened during the week, Saturday morning still belonged to us. That Saturday, I made the eggs. I brewed the coffee. I set the table. Victoria came downstairs in her robe with her hair pulled back, looking soft and familiar, and nothing like the woman in Arthur's photographs. I waited until she had finished her first cup of coffee. Then I placed the manila folder on the table between us. She looked at the folder and then at me. Julian, I'm not going to yell, I said. I'm not going to throw anything. I'm going to sit here while you look through that. Afterward, I would appreciate an honest conversation. Maybe the first one we've had in a while. I had imagined several possible reactions. Guilt, tears, panic, denial, or an immediate apology. What I received was none of them. Victoria read the pages. Her expression moved from surprise to assessment to calculation. Then she closed the folder and looked at me with impatience, not remorse. I knew you were going to make this into something enormous, she said. I stared at her. These are men, she continued, her voice carrying a kind of contempt wrapped in silk. Men who know how to make a woman feel like she matters. Men who make her feel alive. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who treats his work as the most important relationship in his life? Do you know what it's like to feel invisible in your own home for 3 years? I want to know whether you plan to take any responsibility for what is in that folder. She pushed it farther aside. If you can't handle the fact that I needed more than what you were giving me, and if you can't handle that real men showed up where you didn't, then maybe you should leave. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like a criminal for having needs. The kitchen became completely silent. The coffee machine finished its cycle with a small mechanical click. Real men? I repeated. Real men, she confirmed, lifting her coffee cup as though we were discussing the weather. I looked across the table at my wife of 11 years and thought about the folder, Connor's midnight call after my father died, Ryan's secret apartment, and Derek accepting my mentorship while betraying me. Then I smiled, coldly. As you wish, I said. Victoria frowned. She had prepared herself for shouting, accusations, or an emotional argument she could redirect. She had not prepared for calm agreement. What does that mean? It means I heard you, and I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for. I stood, carried my coffee cup to the sink, and left the kitchen. I drove to my Westerville office and spent 8 hours making calls. I retained Sandra Copeland, a Franklin County attorney known for handling high-asset divorces with extraordinary thoroughness, froze my premarital investment accounts, and told Arthur his report might be needed in court. Victoria called 4 times that afternoon. I did not answer. At 6 that evening, she texted, "You're being dramatic. Come home and let's talk like adults." I did not respond. At 8, another message arrived. Fine. Do what you want. You always do. That night, I slept at the apartment of an old college friend named Patrick in Upper Arlington. Not Connor, obviously. Patrick asked only 2 questions. You okay? And, do you mind a pull-out couch? I was not okay, but I was clear. Sometimes clarity is more useful than being okay. Structural engineering had taught me real patience. You do not rush a foundation, skip a load-bearing calculation, or apply pressure before a structure is ready. You place every element, verify the conditions, and act with precision. I spent the next 6 weeks being precise. Sandra reviewed everything Arthur had collected. She told me the evidence of infidelity was airtight, and that, because of the assets involved, including our home, my retirement accounts, and 2 investment properties I had purchased before the marriage, I was in a strong legal position. Then she told me something that changed my understanding of the entire confrontation. 2 months earlier, Victoria had quietly consulted a divorce attorney of her own. Victoria had already been planning to leave. Breakfast had not begun the process. It had only exposed one already underway. She had never intended to repair the marriage. During those 6 weeks, I also met with Dana Briggs. Telling Dana was the hardest part because she was innocent and deserved the truth. We met at a cafe in Hilliard, where I showed her enough of Arthur's report to make Connor's affair undeniable. Dana sat across from me in a heavy coat, both hands wrapped around her mug. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she remained silent for a long time. How long? She finally asked. 2.5 months documented, possibly longer. She nodded slowly and looked through the window. When she looked back at me, her voice was level, the voice of someone who had already made an internal decision. Thank you for telling me. I anonymously contacted Ryan's Human Resources Department about personal properties charged through corporate travel accounts. Ryan had been expensing part of the Kenny Road rent as business housing for out-of-town meetings. It was not a massive fraud, but it was enough to interest the company. I sent Arthur's evidence about Derek to our senior partner, Garrett Walsh, explaining the affair and the possible conflict created by Derek's recent promotion and my role in recommending him. Garrett called within an hour. Julian, he said. I'm sorry. Personally and professionally. I'll handle the Derek situation. Do what you need to do. By the end of those 6 weeks, the structure I needed was in place. Then came the dinner. In early April, Victoria asked to meet and clear the air. I understood that she wanted to negotiate the divorce terms she and her attorney had already prepared. I agreed. I suggested that she invite anyone she wanted and told her I might bring people as well. There was a pause. What does that mean? She asked. Only that it may be a larger group than the 2 of us. The more, the merrier. Another pause. Julian, I don't want this to become a scene. Neither do I. We chose Linde's in German Village, one of her favorite restaurants, with warm brick walls, white tablecloths, and candles. Victoria arrived first, and she brought Ryan. From the parking lot, I could see them through the window, sitting close and leaning toward one another, no longer making much effort to conceal what they were. I entered with Sandra Copeland and Arthur Keene. The expression on Victoria's face when she saw me walk in with two people she did not recognize, one of whom she would soon learn was my attorney, justified every moment of patience from the previous 6 weeks. I sat across from them, introduced Sandra and Arthur as colleagues, ordered sparkling water, and asked Ryan, "How is the Kenny Road place? Did you renew the lease?" The color left his face so quickly that I found it almost medically interesting. No one shouted or threw a glass. The conversation was quieter and more devastating. Sandra had taught me what to say in public, and Arthur had taught me that properly arranged facts need no embellishment. Calm truth destroys a lie more effectively than shouting. I told Victoria that the divorce papers had already been drafted and would be served before the end of the week. I told Ryan that his company's human resources department had opened an inquiry into his expense account. I told Victoria I knew about the weekend in Granville with Derek. I knew about Chicago. I knew about the hotels, the restaurants, the apartment, the dates, and the overlap among the three men. Arthur's documentation covered every material fact she might otherwise attempt to dispute. Victoria's face became very still. Ryan stared down at the tablecloth. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said, and I meant it. "I'm doing it because I am finished. You told me to leave, and I am leaving. I simply think everyone should understand exactly why. What followed was not part of my plan." Victoria set it in motion through one more night of bad decisions. After dinner, her calculated anger became raw. She called 3 times and sent 7 messages that shifted from accusation to contempt, and once, something resembling remorse. The following day, Victoria hosted a gathering at our house on Muirfield Drive. Patrick later mentioned several cars in the driveway. Dana called that afternoon and said Connor had announced he was going to Victoria's house to smooth things over, and told her not to wait up. What I learned later, pieced together from several people, was that Victoria, Ryan, Connor, and Derek all gathered at the house. I was not there. Victoria, Ryan, Connor, and Derek drank heavily while discussing me, the divorce, and the evidence. They ordered several dishes from a Thai restaurant Victoria used often, then left the containers on the kitchen counter before eating. I do not know how long the food sat or under what conditions. I know that around 11:30 p.m., Ryan called 911 from the house. Within 20 minutes, 2 ambulances were parked outside. By midnight, Victoria, Ryan, Connor, and Derek were all being transported to Mercy General Hospital on East Broad Street with what paramedics initially believed was severe food poisoning. The hospital called me at 12:20 a.m. Victoria had never changed her emergency contact, one forgotten administrative detail that became significant when the hospital asked me to come. I drove to Mercy General in a state of structured numbness. When a structure fails, you assess before acting. You do not panic or compromise the investigation. At the emergency desk, I gave my name and was escorted to the treatment area. That was when I saw a scene so absurd it would have been funny if it had not been real. All 4 occupied adjacent bays behind half-drawn curtains, an arrangement the staff had clearly noticed. Victoria lay nearest me, Ryan in the next bay, Connor 2 bays down with Dana beside him in her coat, and Derek across the aisle, pale and staring at the ceiling. Then Victoria saw me. "Julian," she said, "don't you dare look at me like that." I did not answer. I simply looked. A nurse explained that all 4 had arrived within the same hour, with severe gastrointestinal distress and nearly identical symptoms. Foodborne illness was suspected. The Thai meal was the likely source, and the health department had been contacted. I sat in the plastic chair beside Victoria's bay and waited. At about 2:15 a.m., Dr. Philip Graves entered with a nurse. Gray at the temples, he spoke with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. He moved through each bay, checked charts, and spoke briefly to every patient. Then he stepped into the open area, where all 4 bays converged. "I need to speak to all of the patients together," he said, "and to the family members who are present." Dana and I exchanged a look containing exhaustion, grim recognition, and something close to solidarity. Dr. Graves cleared his throat. "I want to be straightforward," Dr. Graves said. "What I'm about to tell you requires serious follow-up." The room went silent. Even Ryan, who had been groaning and complaining since I arrived, stopped moving. "The gastrointestinal symptoms are consistent with salmonella exposure, likely from tonight's food. It is treatable, and you should all recover. But the blood work revealed something else in every patient. Victoria stared upward. Connor covered his eyes. Ryan watched the doctor as if realizing the situation had controlled him all along. All four of you tested positive for hepatitis A. It is early stage, which is good, but it is reportable. Columbus Public Health will require follow-up, contact tracing, and disclosure to anyone with whom you had close contact during the relevant period. He paused and allowed the words to settle across the room. Because you share an exposure window, and hepatitis A can spread through close personal contact or shared food and water, we need to understand the social network involved. Dana uncrossed her ankles and looked at Connor. Connor did not move. Doctor, I said from the chair beside Victoria, I'll tell you everything you need to know. The aftermath was not simple. It never is. Columbus Public Health was notified, and contact tracing began. All four remained overnight. Dana tested negative, a small mercy, and so did I. The divorce proceeded uncontested. Sandra said Victoria's attorney advised settlement rather than litigation because of Arthur's evidence and the hospital circumstances. Our house on Muirfield Drive went on the market in May. The assets were divided with the kind of precision that becomes possible only when both people are too exhausted to continue fighting. Ryan's company completed its inquiry. He resigned in April, and his colleagues were told he was making a career transition, the kind of phrase corporations use when the real story is something no one wants preserved in writing. Derek was removed from the project he had been leading at our firm. He resigned 3 weeks later. I did not celebrate. He had been genuinely talented, and waste is still waste regardless of the choices that produce it. Connor and Dana separated in April. I never asked Dana for the details. She was private, and I respected that. Connor called me once in May from a number I did not recognize. I allowed the call to go to voicemail. The message lasted 23 seconds. He said he was sorry. He said he did not know how to explain what he had done. He said he hoped I was all right. I never called him back. I moved into an apartment in the short north on Buttles Avenue. It had high ceilings, a view of the street, and no memories attached to its walls, corners, doors, or floors. I furnished the apartment slowly. A couch I liked, a reclaimed barnwood coffee table from a high street craftsman, and a photograph of the Scioto River at dawn hung where I could see it from the kitchen. I started running again on the Olentangy River Trail, something I had abandoned during the years I spent pretending everything was fine. I thought about bridges, because bridges are what I understand. I thought about how structures fail, rarely through one catastrophe, but through small compromises that accumulate until the load becomes impossible. I wondered whether the marriage had first weakened through Victoria's choices or through my long hours, and my assumption that a completed marriage could carry itself forever without maintenance. I do not have a clean answer. I suspect I never will. I was not responsible for her affairs or the men's choices, but I could admit I had allowed distance to grow. Both truths existed. Complexity did not excuse betrayal. I have learned to distrust answers that are too clean. The comfort they offer is usually borrowed from the complexity they ignore. By September, morning light entered my east-facing kitchen window with warm predictability. I learned that the right kind of predictability is not a rut, but the foundation of a deliberately chosen life. I am still a structural engineer. I still design bridges. Our firm had just won a contract for a modern pedestrian bridge over the Olentangy River, connecting neighborhoods separated by water. I worked on the load calculations with a focus and pleasure I had not felt in years. Sometimes the clearest way to recognize what you love is to lose the things that were obstructing your view of it. My father, a carpenter, said you could learn much about a man by what he built. He made things people could touch, sit on, sleep inside, and trust to keep out rain. I build with calculations, steel, and concrete. But the rule is the same. Care for the foundation, never skip steps, and never hide damage in a load-bearing wall. Address it completely, even if that means tearing everything down and starting again. Victoria also moved to the short north, far enough away that our paths never crossed. We had no contact. The divorce was finalized in July. I signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in Sandra's East Gay Street office. Outside in the July heat, I felt neither happy nor relieved, only the quiet settling that comes when a long, difficult job is finally completed correctly. Then I walked to a coffee shop, ordered a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and went back to work. Work is what I know how to do, and I have stopped apologizing for loving it. What I will not do again is confuse dedication with neglect or assume that anything important can survive forever without attention. My name is Julian Mercer. I spent 11 years in a marriage that had been failing longer than I admitted. I was not blameless or perfect, but I was faithful and honest. When the truth became unavoidable, I handled it deliberately, patiently, and with every fact in hand. I am telling this because someone is standing in a kitchen, noticing facts they refuse to process, and placing them in a mental folder they have decided not to open. Open the folder. Do not open it to start a war. Open it because you deserve to understand the load you carry and the structure you live inside. The truth does not hurt less because it is delayed. Delay only gives you less time to build something better. Start building.